Hello. Hopefully you can hear me and see me and everything. It says I'm live, so hopefully I'm live. I hope I'm on time for the first comment. Thanks so much for everyone who's joined the live already, already in it. Drop any comments you have in the chat, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. So today, I think we're going to talk a bit about, people have asked me on Twitter if we're going to talk about Marc Guehi. Yes, we are, if you want to do that. But my personal thoughts about where I want to take this live stream immediately in terms of generally the general tone is I want to look more at what happens with the right winger now that Marc Guehi seems to be the main target for going forward. Yeah, do drop any comments in the chat if you can hear me, because again I was never quite sure if I'm live or not. It says I am. The clock's ticking, but I had an issue with this last time where I wasn't sure if I was live. We are, as I say, going to talk a bit about the right wing situation. We know that Marc Guehi is Newcastle's main target now in terms of a centre back target. I spoke last week on the live stream about the distribution of the money that Newcastle had to spend, and I'll say it again. As much as I rate Marc Guehi, and I think he'd be a brilliant signing. Thank you so much for that. As much as I think that Marc Guehi would be a brilliant signing, I believe personally, like I said on the live stream, there's better value for less money at centre back than there is at right wing. And Newcastle have needed a right winger for 2.5 years. They've still got the same options as they had when when the takeover happened with Miguel Almiron and Jacob Murphy, both of whom I think have outplayed themselves from where Eddie Howe picked them up. But to me, it sort of feels like there's a time and a place for those two, and that's kind of gone. And you could have got somebody like Malik Thiaw or somebody for a little cheaper and gone a bit bigger on a right winger. Having said that, Marc Guehi is a brilliant signing. Let me know if you agree with what I just said. And if you've got any questions, fire them away. But we're also going to talk a little bit more about Guehi, as I said, about Anthony Gordon's situation. That still seems to be rumbling away. I've just written the first draft of a breakdown, overview of the summer from a Newcastle perspective. For the summer in terms of pre-season, I've written the first draft. I'm at the Cellar Cup at the weekend, hopefully, so that could hopefully change given the situation. But I think generally the tone of the piece was explaining the sort of nightmare start, the difficulty of Mitchell and Staveley and everything that I sort of said on the prior on the videos around that time. If you haven't gone and watched them, do check them out from the start of the month. I sort of covered that a little bit, but tried to end on a little bit more positivity. And I think the fact that Newcastle are sort of through the talks of Eddie Howe going is sort of now England centric rather than happiness and collaboration and how he's working dynamic centric with Mitchell. I think the fact that we're sort of, if anything's going to happen, it's going to have to be England coming to the table. And I think that Darren Eales has sort of ended that with the new contract and the compensation. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think that England are going to stump up when there's other options out there. But I tried to end with a bigger, better way of looking at the transfer picture, with obviously Asula coming in, Guehi coming in, the right winger Chase, and generally the sort of upbeat feeling that I think we all have going into the season. Let me know if you agree with that. Best right wing by committee. I'm going to still do best, says Johnny. Yeah, I think there's lots of different options there for right wing still, but you're kind of looking at let me just say, as Johnny sort of alluded to, let us see what you guys think about the right wing. I want you guys to lead this discussion. I sort of give my thoughts on the videos. I want this to be you guys getting involved, so do drop your thoughts. But I think for me, if Newcastle are going for Guehi, then it looks like there'll be a cheaper option at right wing. But unless they boost the coffers with the sale of Trippier or Almiron, that's possible. But at the moment, you would imagine it could be a slightly cheaper option of a younger player, or maybe one of those more budget options like a Madueke, who I still think would be around 25-30 million. I think Chelsea would be keen to get rid of him, even to Newcastle, who they perceive as a rival. Nicolas Gonzalez, I've said that I don't think Newcastle, he fits Newcastle in my opinion, but his goal record was fantastic. Will it get done, says Amir. I imagine, Amir's correct me if I'm wrong, imagine you're talking about Guehi. I think it will. I think Guehi will get done from here. I think it feels a little bit Livramento-like, where the fee is kind of where Newcastle are talking about. And I know there's lots of discussions about today about where, about how truthful this sort of breakthrough talk and close talk, lots of this sort of thing, until the offer's accepted. Like, people are worried, for example, that Guehi's turning up for Crystal Palace training, for example. A lot of these things, like he's contracted to Crystal Palace, there's been no agreement, there's no medical book, there's nothing in place for Newcastle to make that deal happen yet. So he's going to go to Crystal Palace training as you'd expect. Anyone like Anthony Gordon turning up to Newcastle training was barely a story. The only reason it kind of half was a story is because a lot of Liverpool fans speculated that he might go on strike, which was never going to happen. So players are professional footballers and they have to do their job. And Marc Guehi is keen on Newcastle by all accounts. That is a deal that will get done because Newcastle they know the offer, but they're obviously going to try and go a bit lower. And I want to just clarify something. Last week I said that they had a release clause in his contract, and I'll admit that I got that wrong because I was looking at the contracts. So I got him and Eze mixed up. It's him and Eze and Elise who have contract clauses, not Guehi. There was a speculation it was 65 million, but 60 million, but that is actually Eze. So Newcastle will have to negotiate a little bit more than they might have done, but for me, this is something that looks like it's going to happen. Johnny's asked, is the Guehi transfer opportunistic? I wouldn't say in the same way that Livramento and Hall were, because there's lots of interest in Guehi. I think that lots of people talking about Newcastle being the only club in for Guehi, and for me, I think that's a positive thing in terms of Newcastle, rather than they're the only team that wants him at that price, which has sort of been bandied around by a lot of different people. No one wants Guehi at 65 million or whatever. Actually, I think the fact that Newcastle have been brave enough to be the first ones to come to the table, and there are other options. Liverpool are looking at Zubimendi. They're looking elsewhere at the moment. They're not focused on Guehi. They like him a lot, but they've also got Van Dijk and Konate. There's not a desperate need for a centre-half. I think that's kind of the reason why other teams aren't coming to the table, is because I think Newcastle have made themselves known here. That's how I take it. So in that sense, I don't see this as opportunistic in the same way that the Livramento was opportunistic because Southampton had gone down. Gordon was opportunistic because Everton were having so many financial issues at that point, and obviously still have been. So I don't see this one is opportunistic. I think this is a major target that Newcastle and ahed over where to go and what direction to go in. As I've said, where do you put the distribution of the major money? Do you go centre half or winger? And maybe they've just thought that the best option of those players to improve the squad immediately. And let's be honest, if Guehi comes in, you look at that defence even without Sven Botman and think that's fantastic, and Newcastle can challenge without Sven Botman, whereas that defence is looking considerably weaker without Botman at the moment. Burn and Schär, I think Schär is brilliant and has been brilliant, but he's been consistently proving himself for so many years. I said we were going to talk about right wingers, but we're still talking about Guehi. Schär has been consistently proving himself for a long, long time against a backdrop of when's it going to end? 1 year contract here. He's 33 next season, 3.5 million. He's outdone himself by so much. You can't keep relying on him to be a star centre half. He's brilliant, but Newcastle need extra strength there. And in Guehi, they've got another powerhouse in the same way that Botman was a transformative signing, and in a different way to Botman as well. He offers physicality and pace, and good at bringing the ball out, whereas Botman's sort of very classy and positional sense is more his thing, and sort of playing the ball into midfield a little similar. But the physicality that Guehi brings really, I think, takes the defence to another level. My argument was that you would probably get the same thing from Thiaw, and then you would benefit more from a big money right midfielder. It's still an opinion I would tend to hold, but as it looks like this is something that's going to happen now, it feels like we're going to have to get on board with Guehi. And I say that like it sounds like I'm not happy about it. I am thrilled about it. I just think that then there's a difficult question to answer, and this is kind of the crux of the live stream. Bill from the back says Craig, yeah, absolutely. This is the crux of the live stream. Where did Newcastle go with the right midfielder? Because it is still a glaring issue, and it's been a glaring issue. It was a glaring issue that they ignored last season. 4 opportunistic signings, like Barnes again, another relegated player. So there was an option to get him for possibly maybe not necessarily a cheaper deal, but certainly a more willing seller in Leicester than they probably would have been if they'd stayed up. Whereas this summer, they kind of that's always been the noises have always been that Newcastle were going to be really, really busy on the players that they needed specifically, rather than being opportunistic. But yeah, that's the thing. I think for me that's where I would look a little bit different. Johnny says, are there any big money wingers available? Depends what you call big money. Really, I think we'll talk about that in a minute. Neto, if you watch my last video, the comments about from Gary O'Neill suggest that Pedro Neto is definitely available. I do have my misgivings, as many people do, I think. Let's get some other questions. Craig says, sorry, above Craig's Bill from the back comment, he actually says, centre-backs are the priority. Our defence was awful last year. Conceding over 60 is terrible. No point scoring and when you concede too many. I want a top keeper next year. It's difficult to argue with that, really, isn't it? To be honest, they can't really be in a position where you can't challenge for the Champions League and concede. Was it the second or third most goals last season? It was absolutely crazy how that went. So yeah, I can understand that thought process. I can understand that, as I say, but I just think that you can get other defenders. My opinion is that you can get other defenders who can, I wouldn't say do as well as Guehi, but who can do the same job as Guehi and transforming the defence in the same way in terms of the physicality aspect, and go and get somebody who is really, really going to make Newcastle a much more balanced team in attack, because they keep going through Gordon. Everything goes through Gordon on the left, and we've seen it with Murphy and Almiron, where it's just not the same. It's just not the same output. It slows the attacks down, and the team just looks a lot worse for it. Certainly did last season, but you can't argue with what Craig just said. 60 plus whatever it was, the second or third most goals conceded in the league. It was mad, and the fact that they got, and so you can understand why they're going for a centre back if you look at that and you look at the stats and say, well, they did okay in attack anyway, because they had Isak scoring and Gordon playing well, and you could play Barnes. If nothing came of the summer in the right wing, you could theoretically play Gordon on the right and Barnes on the left, and that would theoretically strengthen, which they didn't really do last season, because by the time Barnes came back, it was in the sort of not in the realm of experimenting and trying that. But Gordon has actually been as effective almost on the right as he is on the left, which is quite impressive. Yeah, so let's have a Hardick Dave. And Hardick Dave is, by the way, the reason why he called me out on Twitter for having Johan Bakayoko in the thumbnail, which admittedly is a little bit cheeky, because there isn't any interest in him. But obviously there isn't any clear desire to make a bid, but it's just something that I really want to happen. I think it'd be a brilliant signing. I think I've mentioned that on the show, and the club do like him, and there is an interest there, and PSV are kind of in the position where they were with Cody Gakpo, and I do have a little slight understanding of this because I spoke to Cody Gakpo and I've spoken to PSV about these two players quite a bit, and they're in a sort of position where they understand that generally with Dutch football anyway, you kind of understand that eventually there'll be a point where you have to sell a player. And Bakayoko had a really, really impressive season last year, helping PSV to the title. It feels like a good time to cash in, and they tend to be fairly good sellers. Cody Gakpo, for context, went to Liverpool at the point where you would imagine his value would be the highest. It was 37 million that he went for, but he just scored 3 goals in the World Cup. He'd had 2 brilliant seasons at PSV. You would have thought they could have got a bit more than that. And if Newcastle could go in and bid 35, 30, 36 for Bakayoko, I wouldn't see why they wouldn't do that. It's just, that's kind of the thought of my thought process. But there isn't any imminent suggestion of Bakayoko, unfortunately. Hi, Ian. How are you doing? Rafinha should be our number 1 target, says Nathan, but he's 27. Again, Rafinha, like Ferran Torres, like Chiesa, if you watch the video where I sort of said where I sort of said Rafinha and Chiesa would not be the right man for Newcastle, it's because of the wages, and all 3 of those players, age, wages, that they're sort of at the point where, yes, Rafinha would markedly improve Newcastle, and you could probably get him for a decent price because of Barca's financial situation. They're trying really hard to find enough money to register Olmo, I think. So that there's definitely ample opportunity there. But in terms of you would come in and demand money that Bruno is on roughly, and they're talking to Isak about more. They're going to have to sit down with Gordon and talk to him, because, as I say, there's something I did want to say about. Ian said 26, his knees are 36. Exactly. I mean, he's done his cruciate. He's been injured for 3 years. This is kind of the issue with these sorts of players, that their wages, and I think Newcastle need to go for somebody who's a bit up and coming, not necessarily. And that's kind of where Neto is the issue. I think Mbeumo is the ideal target, probably off the list. And Hardik Davis said Mbeumo. A couple of others of you have as well. It's great that you're all chatting away amongst yourselves while I ramble, by the way. But yeah, I think Mbeumo would be an ideal signing. I think that they have to wait, though, as was mentioned, I think, in the chat, that they have to wait to see if Brentford sell Tony, and that's proving a little bit more difficult. We could see what would happen with Spurs, because Spurs are looking for a striker. And Postecoglou wants to, as I think, been quite open about the fact that he wants an out-and-out striker this season. And what are your options in terms of Premier League guarantee at a decent price? You've got Solanke, who you'd have to pay 65 million for. He does have a release clause in his contract. Or Tony, who you could try and get for 40. But that has to happen. And Brentford, I think, have understandably sort of ready to sell Tony. I think he's made it clear he's not signing a new deal. But they won't sell Mbeumo at the same time, so that makes that difficult unless you go with a big offer that Newcastle won't have the money to do so. I do agree. I think I agree with everyone who's saying Mbeumo would be ideal. He's perfect style, isn't he? He's that sort of hard-working, can play down the middle, which would be great. And that would mean that if Newcastle could get Mbeumo, that would mean having 2 wingers who could play down the middle and 3 strikers who could play down the middle, which would mean that theoretically, even in the worst element of disaster, which would be Isak and Wilson out for a long time, like they were at times last season, they would be well covered, better, or at least better covered. So I think that is a very good possibility if the price was right, and that would be something that I would look at. But I think, unfortunately, as I say, going back to the very top of the show, we're not going to be in a position, Newcastle, to react to various deals. Apologies if the camera keeps blurring out and I can't really get the focus back. So apologies about that. It'll just naturally happen. Hardik Dave's asked, any idea what the budget is? Is a case of us having to sell 1 or 2 before we buy a right winger? I hope not. So my sort of the information that I brought to the videos, Dave, a few weeks ago was 100 million roughly, and that's without sales. So that would you think leave not too much if they're going for Guehi, which would mean that you would probably have to sell a couple to really raise the money for for a big right winger, but you can also go and the power of the loan with obligation to buy is quite strong actually, particularly across Europe. Like you can get a lot of deals like that, like Newcastle did with Hall, and that really helped them avoid an instant PSR issue then, because if they'd had time, then they would have been in a lot more serious trouble than they actually were in the end. But I would imagine that they might have to go big on a winger now if they're getting Guehi. I would imagine they'd have to maybe sell one or two, and it could be Trippier, it could be Almiron. I know that they're interested, that they're definitely open to offers for the likes of Longstaff and Murphy as well. But the value it would take for them, because obviously if they go, then it weakens their position further. Like if Murphy goes, numbers wise, it's still two wingers, which is fine. But if Longstaff goes, there's another midfielder, and as me and Chris Waff spoke about after the whole game, Newcastle are already quite weak in there, so there's that sort of thing to consider as well. But generally speaking, I think they have around 100 million without sales, and if they're spending big on Guehi, then that, and sort of 10-15 on Asula, it calls into question what they can do at right wing immediately. What did O'Neill say about Neto, says Nathan. Faberman tweet saying Neto is happy at Wolves. So the quotes were roughly, I don't have them to hand, but they were roughly saying that they hope that they can keep him, but they might have to sell at the right price, which is good negotiation tactic. It means that anyone who undercuts them probably won't get anywhere. And I think he is happy at Wolves, so it's a difficult one to do under the valuation of what Wolves set, which is around 60 million, 55, 60. So unlikely to happen, I think. But yeah, it was an opening of a door that Newcastle have. As Newcastle's situation with Neto is, it goes up to about admiration and nothing more. They've never really looked further at that. So if you sign, Nathan says, so if you sign Guehi, he would probably mean Madueke. Madueke is another one who could be on the list. He is actually quite fairly available from Chelsea by the sounds of it. But if we wanted a Neto or an Mbeumo, we need a couple of sales, making trips. Yeah, possibly. But again, it depends on what you can do with, I think Newcastle might, with somebody like Madueke, I would imagine they'll try and get a low ball upfront offer, or possibly a loan with an obligation to buy in the same way they did Lewis Hall. And people might say, oh, well, Chelsea wouldn't want to do that. But at the same time, Chelsea have a lot of players. I don't know if you've seen the squad list that they've unveiled, and they've got plenty of options. I think Madueke is fourth choice, and he's only on 50 grand a week, so Newcastle could make a fairly decent upgrade on his wages without too many issues. But the big chunk of the price tag will be the issue. So I wonder if they'll look at that possibly. But I think Madueke is one that could really go with it. Nathan says, surely be more than that, as Tony will be offered 50-60 million given his age. But yeah, but the contract situation with Tony is kind of issue, and actually people aren't bidding for Tony. That's kind of why I think he's surprised to be. So if you look at the picture of him when he comes back to Brentford the other day, he looked quite sort of like a little bit like he didn't want to be there, which is naturally he probably would be expecting to have moved by now, I think. And the fact that he hasn't gone was probably quite frustrating for him. There's a few comments. I'm going to go back in the chat, I think, to see if there's any chats that I've missed. But yeah, while I'm sort of, it's a little bit of a lull in terms of the right wing thing. The Gordon situation, I did a bit of, I don't know if you listened to me on the True Faith podcast, but I did a little bit of a dig on what his wages are now at Newcastle. And he's only on around 60 grand, I think, which is, if that's true, that's absolutely insane, because that's probably about bottom half Premier League wages, really. Like, and certainly it's definitely not the sort of elite player of a Champions League chasing team money. And he's well within his rights, I think, with 2 years left in his deal, to say, give me a new deal or I'll go. Maybe that's what he But that's why Newcastle were only able to offer him a 3.5-year deal 18 months ago. I can't imagine they would have done that else for another reason. But it feels a bit like Newcastle are now in a position where they have to react to something, because otherwise they'll lose the control, as I've said. If they've got 2 years on a contract with a player who's not getting the money that he feels he deserves, and let's be honest, he deserves way more than 50 grand, 60 grand a week, and Liverpool, keep the pressure on, then Newcastle are in trouble. But if you're Liverpool, you probably sit there and say, why wouldn't we go back in a year when we can maybe get him at an undercut value? Because Newcastle are still in a position where they can charge what he's worth, which is probably 80, 75, 80 plus, roughly. But they need to worry about, I think, signing to a new deal. They are apparently opening talks. George Colkin said that in The Athletic, and there is nobody better than George, nobody more informed than George. I can say so. That's interesting, but yeah. Madueke doesn't look fluid to me, says Craig. All elbows and knees. Not a fan. Just looks all wrong. He does have a little bit of an interesting. He's quite gangly, isn't he? But I think I look at Madueke, and having seen him, as I say, at PSV before, and spoken to people at PSV about him, and the fact that he came through at Spurs as well, which is around the same time Paul Mitchell was there, I think might be a link that's interesting. But I think Eddie Howe could do something with him personally. I don't know what you think, but I know what Craig thinks, but I don't know what everyone else thinks. I think there's a player in there, and at 30 million, you couldn't get a better option than that for me. Caveating that Nicolas Gonzalez is supposed to be around that valuation, and he scored 12 goals in Serie A last season, so would certainly add something. But his creative output and the fact that his stats were so low in terms of his team play were what put me off personally in terms of Gonzalez. So yeah, I think Newcastle are in a much better position. As I said, I was writing about the summer at the start earlier today, and writing a piece for the BBC to explain to maybe people who aren't familiar with what's gone on, from the outside, why it's been such a strange summer. I think Newcastle have sort of come through that, at least for now. Obviously, they still have to be aware of PSR, and I think maybe, again, I'd love to know what you guys think. But for me, there seems to be a little bit more of a serious take at PSR. People it's just PSR, it's an excuse. And then you saw that Newcastle were needing 70 million to avoid a points deduction. Maybe that's changed a few minds, and that's going to be hanging over. It's a little bit. It's good that every year that's now on the books is now a year where they've brought money in, and they've got revenue, and they've got the Champions League, and Adidas and Seller and St. Maximin and Chris Wood and all that sort of thing, all helping them spend money. But it feels like I don't think there's as much of a clamour from what I'm seeing from people that suggest that they should go out there and spend bigger than they can on a winger, if they get Guehi, because it puts them under pressure later. Dave says, have targets been revised post Mitchell's arrival? Have we started doing some groundwork for a right wing target, or is it a case of assessing our options and let the season begin? It's a question that, if I'm honest, I don't really know the answer to, but I think for me the answer to that is that the pool that Newcastle are working in for the winger is roughly the same, regardless of who's overseeing it. That people know about the players in that bracket. There's only a few of them. I said this last week, so I think that it's just a case of the only thing that might change in that situation is maybe the emphasis of who likes who and who wants who, and you might see that change in terms of Nixon, because people forget Steve Nixon is actually the one who's being mostly replaced here by the sounds of things, rather than Howe. Like, there's lots of talk about Howe getting pushed out and his nose out of joint because of the recruitment situation, but we've got Steve Nixon's done a pretty good job, and he's done really well in the takeover in terms of finding players, particularly in Europe. So whether he thinks differently to Mitchell, but it's always possible. But I think that's why they've been slow. I think that's why it was slow in July, and I think maybe they've obviously had a discussion to make a decision to go big on Guehi, and that has repercussions for the right winger. As I say, I think there's plenty of different options that haven't necessarily been mentioned that you could get for a slightly cheaper price than some, like Neto or Mbumo. Let's say they're available for 50 to 60 in that bracket. Like, there's no way that Bakayoko is going to be available for that, or Daniel Marlins is another example of somebody who I've brought to the table as well. There's no way that those guys are going to be worth that. So. And because of their contract situations or the ceiling that their current leagues and teams have in the case of Bakayoko. So I think that there's different options out there than people are actually looking at, but I think that the reaction, the ultimate reality, and someone was asking for Guehi news. The current news is basically that they're waiting to make a second bid. They're talking about the price. I think it's around 65 million. They're trying to get as low around that as they possibly can. I think this is a prediction, but I think he'll be at least in the crowd at one of the Cellar Cup games at the weekend. I think it's got that sort of feel to it. Gonzalez mentioned in the chat again. As I say, I think his issue for me is in terms of output. Creatively, he scored lots of goals. He doesn't look physical enough as well, and his pressing stats aren't good. Team play isn't what he brings. Intensity isn't really what he brings by the looks of him. Again, I haven't overly watched a lot of him, but I watched him in the Cellar Cup, and he gave last year, and he gave Matt Target a right run around. And I'm sure if he joins, Eddie Howe could do something with him. But I just think there's better options out there than him. Yeah, the Longstaff situation. So Ian McKenna's just answered to Ian Kirkpatrick and said Ian Kirkpatrick said that he doesn't think Longstaff's good enough. Ian McKenna responded and said, I don't know why I'm reading this out. You can all read it as well. But he said that we need a squad. And I think this is where the Longstaff situation sort of comes in, because you've got to remember the context around Sean Longstaff. Like, he was never supposed to play that much last season. That's why they bought Tonali. Initially, they bought Tonali to play the Longstaff role. The midfield would have been Joe Linton, Bruno, and Tonali. Longstaff on the bench would have been where he, and playing and competing with, and then you've got Willock as well, who'd be ahead of him in the queue. So he would have been probably a squad player for much of last season if Tonali hadn't been injured. He's somebody who runs and has a lot of energy and gives a lot to the team in that sense. That's why Eddie Howe still likes him, and that's why he got into the team, because he's the only kind of player that Newcastle had available for most of last season who does that. So I think if Longstaff is to stay, which I don't think many people would actually be against in this in terms of the squad. I think it would be a good thing. I think lots of people see Longstaff playing all the time, and Byrne playing at left back as well, or Byrne playing at all, Almiron playing. There aren't many better options in those positions available when they're playing, and I think that comes back to, in terms of Almiron, that comes back to why I think they needed to go big on a right winger. But in terms of Longstaff, Tonali should be back by the Tottenham game, and then Longstaff shouldn't be getting too much game time, I think. Yes, I do think that done deal is it's very difficult to say done deal, but I think this one's likely to happen again. you could watch this live stream back tomorrow and he's holding up a Chelsea shirt or something. I don't know, but to me, I think it'll happen. It'll happen, yeah. Miley over Longstaff says, Mark, it's a shame he got injured. Agreed. Again, Miley coming in is a real bonus. I don't think many people expected Miley to be as proactive this time last year. Obviously, he made his debut against Chelsea, didn't he? On the final day of last season, he hit the bar with a really good shot. I don't know if you remember that. And yeah, it looked really, really good. And we thought we'd see glimpses of him. Then the injuries hit and he came in. And there was a point in November when he played Chelsea, PSG, and Man United roughly back to back, I think, and played pretty much all three teams off the park by himself almost. And that was when I think the whole country looked at him and thought this guy's really good. But it was also like not really what should have happened to a player like at that age and at that stage. So I think hopefully we'll get to see Miley in the squad role, which he needs to be. He's only 18 now. Turned 18 in May, so he needs to be given that opportunity. I think Newcastle can do what Man City have done with Phil Foden, which is not loan him out, not take him, not give him, burn him out in the Championship or anything. Let him train and play around better players. He doesn't need to play all the time. It's physically not ideal for him to play all the time. I think that's probably what's contributed to these two injuries that he's had back to back. But once he comes back and there's Willock, as I say, Longstaff, Bettinelli, Jolent and Bruno all ahead of him, injury put it into the others, he can sit in and have 20 minutes at the end of games and be a different option, because he's the only one, I think, the thing that he brings that Longstaff doesn't and Willock doesn't is a really good foot on the ball. And there's lots of talk in the summer about England and midfielders that get teams playing, and you need someone like the option was Mainu. People saying you play Mainu in midfield because he gets England playing, and I think that's what Miley does for Newcastle that Longstaff doesn't. In the same way, Longstaff's very good at as I say, running around and making the team busy in midfield. But when he gets the ball, as we've seen in the preseason, he doesn't really. He doesn't really. You don't know. I don't think he knows what he's going to do with it yet, and I think that's kind of where he drops down, I think. Do I think Guehi will get done before Southampton, or do I think one that could drag on till the end of the window? I think Guehi will be done by Southampton. I think he'll be sat in the, as I said, I think he'll be sat in the stands, possibly for one of the Select Cup games. Well, that doesn't mean that it'll be signed or announced, but if you remember, Tino Livramento was sat in the stands for one of the Select Cup games, and we had a really good. I was in the press box that weekend, and we tried our hardest to really get Eddie Howe to comment on Livramento, and he just wouldn't do it. So I think we could be in a similar situation. It's about Newcastle know the price for Guehi. Going back to the question from Johnny earlier about opportunism, I think this is why he isn't opportunistic, because they know what they're going to get from this deal. They know what Palace don't need to sell. Obviously, as I say, no release clause. I'll make that clear. They're in a position where they've already sold Elise, and they're probably going to have to sell. They're vulnerable with Eze, so they'll want to keep Guehi if they can. But they've set what they think is a realistic prices up to Newcastle, probably to match it. But you wouldn't be a good negotiator if you didn't try and push it down. So that's why I think the first offer was rejected. The second one might even be rejected, but I think eventually, because the price is there, 65 million does it. It's also the structure of the deal, how much up front, how much in add-ons and that sort of thing. But I think the fact that there's no immediate competition and the fact that Newcastle know the price means that I think that eventually it'll get done. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if he's in the crowd for the Select Cup. I definitely wouldn't be surprised if he's signed by Southampton. I think it's a lot further on than it was when David Ornstein tweeted saying that talks had opened. I think there's been a little bit of a breakthrough in the fact that nobody else has come to the table since. Yes, I agree with what people are saying in the chat, but Nobody's come to the table since. So, and that's been nearly a week now. So I think that this one at the moment looks good, but you can never say it's done until it's absolutely done. Obviously, Guehi refused the new contract. Also, yeah, that was true. That was last summer, I think, wasn't it? That he rejected a new deal and has not wanted to open talks. I think it comes down to what I was talking about contracts having a big impact on a bigger impact than people think on transfers. Like Guehi is in the position, and the great example of this is Harry Kane when he tried to leave for Man City before he went to Bayern, before Haaland joined City. He was in a really dodgy situation because he was on a contract with no release clause, no clause to get out of it for 6 years. He signed it for 6 years. He still had 2 or 3 years left on it at that time. And when he eventually left, he was in a position where I think he only had 1 year left on it. So Spurs, and what I was saying about Newcastle's control with Gordon being this year, next year it's not the same. And that's why Guehi was at the position where he knew he'd have 2 years, 1 or 2 years left in this deal when he gets that power, whether it be this summer or next summer. But if he signs that contract that's offered to him, he loses that power at a key point in his career, and then he is very much stuck at Palace if Palace want to keep him. Whereas the fact that he's openly turned down a bid and doesn't want a contract offer and doesn't want to talk about another option suggests that he knows he's going to leave at some point, whether it's this summer or next summer. And it looks like now because Newcastle are in a position where they're bidding to get they're bidding on a very similar level to what they're not there yet, but they're not getting rejected out of hand. I think it kind of is coming to the point where it's Newcastle fans saying that the deal's dead because he's training with Palace. He has to train with Palace because there's no deal agreed. If he doesn't train with Palace, then that just probably makes it worse. It probably agitates Palace to not want him to go and to dig their heels in. If it's in Eddie's interest for this to go as smooth as possible, and that means while he's a Crystal Palace player, turning up to Crystal Palace training. The reports are, and the current situation is, that it's close to an agreement. Newcastle haven't agreed, but they're still in talks. So, of course, at this point, he's still going to go to Palace training because why else? What else would he do other than go on strike and upset the whole situation? When players going on strike I think it comes down to the desperation when they know that they're not in positions. As I've just said, Guehi's in a very powerful position now. Whereas Harry Kane, for example, when he did go on strike to go to City, he knew that he had no other options to try and force Daniel Levy's hand, and it didn't work. So in the case of Guehi and also in the case of Gordon, the idea of going on strike when you've got 2 years left on your contract, because that means that you either because those players know that this summer is the last summer where clubs can get maximum money for those players, or next summer they get less money, so the power shifts to the player from 2 years onwards. That's when the power shifts. There's absolutely no point in going on strike, as Harry Kane tried and failed to get himself out of Spurs at that point. Yeah, precisely. Ian's just said basically he's the captain of Palace. He's got to train. He's too professional player not to train. I think that's absolutely true. So have I missed something between Travis and Ian? Because there seems to be an argument. Can someone explain? I've missed the topic of the conversation, but I'd love to know what that was about, because if it's about the winger or going big on that or what, but I think for me, as I say, I would go big on the. Maybe you want to say goodbye, possibly, but I think it's not at that stage yet. Not until, from a player's perspective. Again, I only have sort of second-hand suggestion, sort of second-hand sources on this, and players tell me former players tell me, and certain agents tell me how these things work in conversations. But from a player's perspective, they're usually the last to know. It's kind of like, right, it's agreed, you're off, sort of thing. So he's probably aware that there's interest, or he definitely is aware. He's probably given the green light to it, but he isn't thinking about saying goodbye to Palace yet because it isn't done. So you've seen players like, for example, it's just debating the price of Guehi. Yeah, fair enough. You've seen examples like players go on like Australia tours and tours to different countries, and then they come back when a deal gets done. They're the last people to usually know about it. Basically, they leave it up to their agents to talk about. They give a ballpark figure of what they want. They give an interest of or not, whether they want to go to a club or not, and then they're the last to know about it. So I can't imagine he's yet thinking about Newcastle, but these things happen very quickly. And as I say, it's a couple of days to the Cellar Cup, so that might be, on reflection, slightly late at this point. But we could easily hear in the next 2 hours that they've agreed a fee, and then it all suddenly becomes very, very quick. He comes up for the medical next. Because personal terms will broadly have been agreed in principle between the agent and the player, even though sort of tapping up sort of thing doesn't tend to happen on the face of it. But players, everyone's kind of on the same page when it comes to that sort of thing. So Newcastle wouldn't be Newcastle wouldn't be chasing Guehi as much as they are if they didn't get any suggestion of interest from his perspective that he wants to join. Deals like Guehi with a lot of money involved take time. Let's be honest. Exactly. This is a club record transfer, it looks like, for Newcastle. It's going to take a long time to do. And they're in a position where they don't have... It's not like they have the money just to... They do have enough money to do it, but they have things that we're discussing. They have things to consider in terms of the repercussions with the right midfielder, which... It is a massive thing. Like if I'll reiterate, they still have the same right wing options, out and out right wingers, like pure right wing options, than they did in 2022 when the takeover happened, and that's not really the case for any other position. They've improved every position except right wing, and they opted not to do it last summer. I don't think they can really afford, in my opinion, to really avoid doing it this summer as well. That's why. These deals probably take ages, because they've got all that sort of stuff to consider. So yeah, and keep your thoughts coming, keep your comments coming, because I'm really enjoying the interaction. By the way, it's the first anniversary of my first video on YouTube. I did a Cellar Cup vlog, and it was rubbish. I don't know if I got the camera angles wrong. It was in landscape and not portrait, and it was terrible, but it was the start of a journey that's got me to here with 600 subscribers and 50 people in a live chat. So really, really enjoying talking to you guys, and the growth on the channel's been mad, actually. Like, it's not just 600 subs, which I'm really happy with anyway. I'm happy because it was 300 subs, under 300 subs coming into the summer. So actually, the growth has actually been massive in the last 2 or 3 months. Mark says, I agree Guehi is expensive, but one hell of a player. And best friends apparently with Gordon. I do want to touch on that in a second. So if he's going to make Gordon stay, maybe we pay £10 million more than he's worth. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Si, for the happy birthday comment. Travis, yeah, I hope you don't think I was thinking you were arguing. It was just I just wanted to know what the topic of the conversation was, because I just caught you guys saying that we'd agree to disagree, and I was just interested to know what it was. Yeah, I think that the Gordon point is actually something we haven't talked about. These things, like I've said, like with Bruno and Isak saying about being happy at the club, people will think it's trivial to say that Gordon's his best friend. Gordon's comment about him wanting to join him and stuff, and Guehi's comment while I'm at it about playing at St James's Park, like they do make a difference. Like not maybe to the actual negotiation and the brass tacks and all that sort of serious stuff, but in terms of wanting him and willing him to sign, Gordon being at the club will be a massive thing, but also in turn next year it'll be a massive thing for or wherever it'll be a massive thing for Gordon to have Guehi there, because their friendship goes back down to England's youth systems, and Gordon's been, I did a piece of the BBC on Gordon where I spoke to one of his England coaches, and he said that he's been in the England squad around for a long time, and so is Guehi. And there is another point actually I want to mention about if Guehi comes in, that's three of the back four will be from Chelsea's academy, and that's massive. And Neil Bath, the Chelsea academy director for 30 years, has just left Chelsea. So if Paul Mitchell is looking at a revamp for his academy and a direction for his academy, absolutely go for Neil Bath, because he's the man who's really driven the most successful academies. And I know it's only really got the recognition it deserves in the last few years, but so many big name players he's worked with, not even the ones that, like Mason Mount and Reece James and Tammy Abraham and obviously Livermore and Hall, not just those guys, but players who don't play for who never played for Chelsea's first team, who had trials or spells at Chelsea's academy, like Declan Rice and Raheem Sterling. Obviously came back later, but didn't come through the ranks. He's had and all of those people, and believe me, I've spoken to a lot of the people around Chelsea, players and Chelsea at that time, in due diligence for the likes of Hall and the likes of Livermore, but also the families of like Mount and Reece James. Everyone keeps saying about Neil Bath. So I think Neil Bath's a really, really interesting. He's just left Chelsea. He's a really interesting somebody I would look at going. If I'm Paul Mitchell, I'm looking at instantly revamping the academy, which really badly needs it. I'd go and get Neil Bath in, definitely. Ian says Guehi was the standout player at the Euros. And Yamal, but we're not getting Yamal exactly. Yeah, Guehi, I think there's a lot to be said for that, and Guehi being the standout player at the Euros is quite a big thing for him, because I think lots of us, certainly I did, when I saw that he'd be starting alongside Stones at the time, I was a little bit trepidatious about that, and he proved everybody wrong, because he didn't just handle the situation. As I say, he thrived in it. So he's proven himself able to play at that level, and it would be a big statement. This is why the price is high, because he's coming off the back of the Euros, where his stock's going to be that high. And as I say, I thought he had a release clause in his contract, and that's not the case. So, of course, Palace are going to drive that price. And I agree wholeheartedly that Guehi is a really good was really good at the Euros. Craig says, I'm looking forward to seeing how does the Sula kids got all the tools to be a top striker. As I say, I completely agree with that. And I said that from the very start of when he was linked. Somebody I watched a fair bit of last season. Just don't look at his stats. Don't judge him on what he did, because he was playing in a train wreck of a team that didn't have the confidence or the direction when he was playing it, particularly in the first half of the season under Paul Heckenbottom, to really shine. He didn't have that possibility. So absolutely all the hallmarks has been, as Craig says, he's quick, he's strong, he can play out wide. Very, very similar sort of makeup, and I wouldn't say he's anywhere near the level or anywhere near as skillful, but very similar sort of, you can play a very similar style of football with him up front than you can with Isak, and that's a massive thing. Gordon was close to Elliot Anderson. Does that mean Gordon's going to Forest? Says, does that mean, should we worry about Gordon going to Forest because Elliot Anderson's joined Forest? That's Johnny's comment. That it's a fair point. It doesn't really make a great deal of difference when push comes to shove. Like, I think, like Declan Rice and Mason Mount were best friends, as sort of alluded to, playing at Chelsea, and that Mason Mount was never able to go. Declan Rice was never able to persuade Mason Mount to go to Chelsea. So, but I think in the sort of like situation when a club's seriously interested, I think the fact that Gordon and Guehi are friends is going to be a key thing in Newcastle's situation. Messi, Ronaldo would have struggled to get a goal from that Sheffield United side. Exactly, Si. I completely agree with that. They scored 35. in the whole season. And lots of like the stats will say that, and I've spoken to people around the Derby team in 2008 that got 11 points and stuff, and the stats will say that Sheffield United aren't as bad as those, and I think that is probably true because there were sort of flashes of something in certain games from Sheffield United that there wasn't from Derby, but they're in the same bracket of team. They were really, really bad from the very start. Needs a new mate. I see what the point. Yeah, sorry, Johnny. I misunderstood what you mean. Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a good thing that he joins. Rumours on the South Coast that Fraser and Armstrong might be a swap deal. I don't know. I can't imagine why, because I think from Southampton's perspective, it'd be very easy to do. But I can chase that one up because I do have fairly decent connections close to Adam Armstrong. Won't delve any more into that than that at the moment, but I can ask a couple of people to see if there's any truth in that, and maybe put it in Monday's video. Sorry, possibly Friday's video, because I will be at the Cellar Cup hopefully. It's just whether I go for 1 day or 2 days to bring you a video. There's still 40 people in the chat, which is mad, really, considering I've been sat here for an hour talking, and I think if that's for me, what's my take on Asula, Ian? If that's directed at me, I think, as I said, he's a really, really good signing. I think he's a brilliant, brilliant player in the making. Not ready for the Premier League yet. There was a suggestion. I think he was round. I think he wasn't saying this has actually been discussed. I think it was his take, but Keith Downey said that he might be loaned out. I don't think he'll be loaned out. I think he'll be happy to be a third striker, and I think he'll make a lot of easier decisions for Eddie Howe next season in terms of not necessarily playing, but if there's another option there, then you don't need to risk Wilson or Isak in situations that they had to be risked in last season. Like, there was a point where Isak and Wilson were constantly sort of either out together, or one was injured as the other one was coming back. They were never fit together, and that was actually a huge thing for Newcastle getting into the top four. The previous season was that back end run where they had both of them fit. Isak would start, and Wilson would come off the bench and finish the game off, and he got 18 goals from basically 20-minute, half-an-hour cameos, which are much easier possibilities if Asula's in the squad, able to offer a little bit of energy, able to just cause a bit of havoc. He might not score a goal, but he's definitely going to put himself about at the very least. And he's not a complete novice. I mean, he's just actually was quite impressive last season. I know that people look at 21 games, no goals, but he came through with a lot of really, really good performances in very difficult circumstances, leading the line by himself. He can create chances for himself. That's a crucial thing. He can take the ball and create space for himself a little bit like Isak can. He can hold the ball, he can run behind. I think Eddie Howe's going to do wonders with him. If we buy Guehi, do you think the club will try and sell players to up the budget for the right winger? That's from Mark. I wouldn't be surprised. I think they're trying to do that anyway. I think just not hearing about it. I know that Almiron has interest from Saudi and he doesn't want to go, or didn't want to go in January. And the last I heard, that was still the case. There's also interest from Spanish clubs and potentially other English clubs as well. Ipswich looked at him, I think, but then they got Amari Hutchinson, so I think that's probably unlikely. But Trippier could go. There are players who can be sold. It's not quite the same as it was when St Maximin went, and he was the only obvious sale because Newcastle needed a lot of headroom in order to sign Barnes. There's just a little bit. They've got a bit of headroom now, and they can probably afford to maybe push a little bit back like they did with Isak and Gordon, and sort of like kick the can down the road a little bit. But they, I think, are being as cautious as they weren't being then because of what happened with PSR. So it's possible that they could sell someone. Ian, if Guehi comes, do you think we might move to 5 at the back? Hall and Tino providing the width. Maybe, I guess, but then you take away. What do you take away from the midfield, or do you? Is this in the? Is this? I'll throw that back to you, Ian. Is this in the scenario that Newcastle don't get a right winger, so they go 2 up front, or do you go the 2 and do you take a midfielder out? Because if you take a midfielder out, I think that weakens considerably what Eddie Howe's trying to do. He has tried 5 at the back at different points, but I think there's more strength in midfield to put the focus on that. But let me know if that's if that's taking a midfielder out or taking a forward out. If they take a forward out, then potentially if they don't get a right winger, that it could be something that they look at. But I think Eddie Howe's pretty wedded to 4-3-3 at the start. We did try it at the end of last season. It worked quite well. It's absolutely true. It did, but I think Eddie Howe is quite wedded to 4-3-3 by the sounds of it. Right, we've been here an hour. Still 40 people in the chat. Anything else? Anything else you want to talk about? I mean, we're in a position, I think. Can I actually? There's 40 people in the chat. How do you think these live shows are going? I've done 3 of them now. The second one, by the way, I want to apologise for the awful state of the sound and the visuals, because I just it was a breaking news one. I kind of wanted to see how many people would what's my favourite crisps. I'll give an answer to that in a second. But yeah, just drop some comments in the chat about what you want to see from these lives, what you want to see going forward. I'm putting a content plan together for the start of next season. And I want to know what people want to see. Are you interested in sort of non-Newcastle content as well? My thing that I want to look at is possibly some European, like if you watch my Schalke video where I went to Gelsenkirchen and did a video on that, I really enjoyed doing that. So maybe some sort of going to Europe and finding some stories like that, doing some videos, and that's something I thought of. But while you're here, just let me know what you think of I'm happy to do more lives, but I'm generally thinking about what I want to do with more content. Favorite crisps? That was the question. So this is a difficult one, because like my favorite flavor of crisps was probably salt and vinegar, but I couldn't eat salt and vinegar all the time. I think the most Moorish crisps are probably the most basic, which is Walker's or maybe some other ready salted. I think you can't. I can't. When I get a bag of ready salted crisps, I can't stop eating them. So maybe that's my favorite. But I think in terms of flavor, it's definitely salt and vinegar crisps. Nice to hear about your trips to other clubs. Yeah, that's something that, as I say, it was. I went and did a piece for the BBC on Schalke, and I just took the camera along and wanted to sort of dovetail and do one of each, and I figured that it would just see how it went, and it did really well. And I was, I'm loath to stretch way too far away from Newcastle, because I know that's what the majority of my my audience is. And I love talking about Newcastle, and I love doing these things, and I really appreciate the comments about no sensationalism. That makes me feel really happy, because that is something that when I started this, I've seen lots of people do sensationalist stuff, and that's not what I wanted to do. So I'm really, really, really happy with the way it's going. So thank you so much for that. Someone asked what my goal as a journalist is. Well, I'd love, like everyone, I'd love to get a position in one of those big, the big places. But I also love the idea of working more for myself, and I've been freelance since I left university. So, and I things like growing this audience, and I love doing that. So I'm happy doing. I think I've fallen in love with the idea of doing my own thing since I've built this audience on YouTube, and the fact that I can come on and do a live stream and talk to 40 people about football is really, really I really love it. Love doing it. So I'm really happy to hear that you all enjoy the content and you're all happy with how it's going. And as I say, there'll be a content plan, because there is something at the end of August where there will be a little bit of a break in the channel, unfortunately, for a couple of weeks. But there is a content plan I'm putting in place, and I'll put a video out in a few days to maybe next week to announce what's going to happen in the next few days, next few weeks. By the way, if I'm not looking at the camera's up here, and the chat's down here, so I'm just reading the chat. That's why I'm not looking at the camera so much this time. But I'm really happy to hear that you're all you're all really happy with how it's going. Someone in the middle of the chat said, if we buy Guehi in a decent right winger, what position do you think Newcastle will finish? I think, again, this is where we'll finish in the next 5-10 minutes, but I'd love to know what you think on this. I think that the minimum requirement from the board will be top 4, and I think that might sound harsh, but with no European football, the fact that they've gone out and kept key players, but then gone out and strengthened in key areas in that scenario, as Marc has right pointed out, I think the desire will be top 4, and I think that Eddie Howe will be in trouble if he doesn't get it. It's not what I want to happen, by the way. I'm not suggesting that should happen. I just think that the way the club is, the fact that Stavely's gone out, and it's, I think, instantly become a little bit more ruthless, the club generally. I think that means that top 4. Let me know what you think in the next few minutes before we end. Do you think that sounds harsh? Do you think that top 4 is the minimum requirement? Top 6 minimum. Yeah, I think it'd be interesting. Because the other thing is, it depends. Like, what do Isak, Bruno, and Gordon, who have kind of, particularly Isak and Bruno, and specifically Bruno mostly, because I think he was the one who's closest to going this summer. I think the club planned for him to go. They had a plan for him to go. What did they say if Newcastle aren't in the Champions League next season? Do they turn around and say, look, now's the time we're going to go? If we can avoid injuries and a centre back and a mystery right winger, I think we can push for top 2. There is a bit of a gap. There's lots of question marks over Liverpool, and obviously Man United and Tottenham and Villa have Champions League. There's a lot of space up there to attack that Newcastle are in a position that none of those other clubs are. So I think there's got to be a lot of pressure. Top 4 in the cup, or a cup. I think, yeah, absolutely. There's got to be that sort of level of thing. I think what I'll end on is to say that it'll be, if Newcastle did the same season as they did 2 years ago, which was celebrated beyond belief when it happened, I think that would be accepted. I think there'd be a lot more grounded response to that season. I think that's kind of where for the first time, there's a bit of pressure externally and internally at Newcastle to deliver something beyond, because, as I said last week, they avoided relegation in the first season. They then overachieved. Then they had last year where they had issues and there was all that sort of injury problems and all that to deal with. Suddenly now they're in a position where they've got no European football as an excuse. They've got if they can keep players fit, which they absolutely should, because they'll have fewer games. They should win. They should be in the conversation for a top 4 finish. Sai says, I honestly think we can finish 3rd. Liverpool may have a dip with the new manager, Man United, and they're going to do too much, and Chelsea are a mess. Chelsea are in exactly the same position as they were last season. You don't know what you're going to get, and I think that is crazy considering that Todd Bowley's going into his 3rd season now. And they keep spending money, and you keep looking at them thinking, what are they trying to do? So I absolutely agree. Top 4 has to be the target. I fully agree. The expectation has to be Europe minimum. It feels like the club is there's a shift in the way that everyone's thinking now, and I think that's a great thing, but it also brings different levels of pressure. I think that's sort of like the security blanket of when, if you remember when Howe was under pressure at the start of last season. Sorry, at the middle of point of last season at Christmas time, and people were, could he be sacked? Could he be sacked? Most people were saying no, he couldn't be ridiculous. Whereas I think that sort of level of disbelief about Howe not being at the club this time next year is sort of dissipating. I think that shows. FA Cup inbound, give us a cup. Newcastle needs to make a statement, I think, of some sort this season. I don't think, if Newcastle finish top 6 and the cup, I think it's good. It's an acceptable season. I think it's not an amazing season, and that's crazy to say, but that's where the expectation level's going. I think it's crucial. Again, not more so from the squad as well, because you've got Bruno, you've got Isak, you've got Gordon, you've got Tonali. Maybe if he has a good year and he's looking at, obviously he owes Newcastle a lot more. But Joe Linton signed a big contract. He's not signed a big contract just for the money and because he loves, he loves the Town Moor. He's done it because he wants to win things with Newcastle. So there's got to be a point where you drop the sort of that sort of this will be okay. You've got to really go for the jugular. And I think next season is that season. 2.5 years ago, we wouldn't have dreamt of European football. So any big signings, we had Mr. Ashley. We're fighting to stay up. Look at us now. We must thank Commander Staveley. Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. I think Newcastle haven't lost much in terms of the structure of the way things are moving since Staveley's gone, because all the positions have been filled, but they've not got somebody who's the face of the club anymore. It's far less personable. And she was the reason why. I think I said this in my reaction video. She was the reason why this whole thing happened. So there's got to be something to replace that void, and I think it's more likely to be. It's obviously going to be Eels, but I think the club's going to become a little bit less personable and a little bit less. A bit more ruthless in that sense, but Stavey absolutely deserves a massive amount of credit. Emery will get sacked this season. Always struggles third season. There is a point about what they say in Spain, which is called going full Emery. Never go full Emery, and it's when they his teams always slightly implode at certain points. He's very, very intense, very, very. Not just in his style of play, but also the way he works in a different way to Eddie Howe. Eddie Howe is very demanding of his players, but as a person, as a man, is very, very easygoing and very, very good in terms of man management. I think Emery has got a lot of hallmarks of Rafa Benitez, who lots of players, after a while, really struggled to sort of get along with. There wasn't that sort of immediate personal touch, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's something. Emery's a brilliant coach, but that was always the issue that Newcastle would have had if he got the job ahead of Eddie Howe, was the fact that he does have a track record of eventually sort of collapsing because of that whole thing. Tonali, the kind of player who individually wins you games, he's huge for us this season. Yeah. There's more of those players in the team now. You look everywhere. There's a player that you can think can win the game. There's Gordon, there's Bruno, there's Tonali, there's Isak, there's Barnes. Barnes has won plenty of games for Newcastle last season. The squad and the team is brimming with them. I think that's why the expectation is where it is. Expecting big things from Tonali. He can speak English, and that's a really, really, really good point, because I think where I'm most excited about Tonali is that it's this season you won't have the sort of, remember that discourse where he didn't really want to be here and he was unhappy and he was forced to move, all of which was never true, but about him settling into life at Newcastle and learning the language, learning to adjust to things. That was always going to be an issue, while he's also learning how to play for Eddie Howe on the pitch. All of the off the pitch things are sorted, and he's been training a lot with Eddie Howe. I think he's ready to have a go this season, and I think he'll have a really good season. Fluent English now, which will help him. Absolutely agree that Tonali's in for a really great season. So I think we'll leave it there, guys. Thank you so much. There's still 46 people in the chat. Any update on the Paqueta situation before we go? I don't honestly know. I think West Ham aren't particularly happy with the situation. I think this one's going to roll for a bit. It's not the same as Tonali, though, is it? Because Tonali obviously was, it's a lot more serious than the situation. Gieri says, Marc Guehi, £60 million for Newcastle. Yilmaz, good move. Gonzalez signed for Newcastle, and Asula and Villa's a Newcastle player. But thanks, guys. We're gonna end it. Thanks for everyone for enjoying. There's still nearly 50 people in the chat, which is astonishing. An hour and 15 minutes into this. I'll be back with another live chat next week. Next Wednesday we'll do this all again, but I'll hopefully give you a video from the Cellar Cup at the weekend as well, and then there'll be the Monday show and the Thursday show as well, and then the Southampton game. So lots to come there. As I say, I will give you also a bit of an update on the situation as well with the channel in the next few weeks. So thank you very much, guys. I'll see you next time. And yeah, thanks very much. Cheers. See you later.